the West runs the world. We can tell Putin what to do. We can tell Xi Jinping what to do. We can tell Modi what to do. We can tell Lula what to do. We can tell anyone what to do because we are the West. We are the United States and the reality of a world in fundamental change.
The arrogance of the West lies in one stubborn illusion, the belief that the United States is still the unquestioned superpower it once was between 1898 and 1945, a time when Washington's word was law and nations dared not disobey. But the world has changed, and the era of blind compliance is over. It will never come back.
What is happening now is, of course, the end of an era. It's the end of actually a sub-era and an era. The end of the era is the end of the Western dominance over the world system. And this is a dominance that began with the European empires and then transferred to the U.S. empire after World War II. But that dominance essentially lasted from around 1750 to around 2000. So around 250 years. You could add one more 250-year period, helpfully, starting in 1500, European imperial expansion began. That's with the voyages of Columbus and Vasco da Gama. So the voyages both to the west and to the east from Europe led to the beginning of the European global expansion. But Europe had its rivals, especially in the old world. In the new world, people succumbed to the old world diseases mainly. But in the old world, Asia didn't simply succumb to Europe, but over a period of around 250 years, European powers gained their ascendancy. And Britain became the dominant of all of the European empires by the 19th century with the defeat of Napoleon. So we all grew up in the age when it was taken for granted that Europe, and then after 1945, Europe and the US, quote, ran the world. And indeed, in 1950, if you looked at the global landscape, the vast wealth, the financial power, the technological power, the new atomic age, everything was in this Western-led world plus the Soviet Union. But China, India, Africa, Latin America had no discernible role. Actually, quite interestingly, the Western world also reached a peak of its share of world population, not only power, but we should remember that Europe, relative to Africa and the Middle East, was much more populous then than today in relative terms. Europe was a larger population than Africa and its Middle East neighborhood. Now it's half the population of those two. So I was born in 1954 in a European-led world. There was a Cold War and a very dangerous one between the Soviet Union and the United States-led world. But there was absolutely no doubt that this was a Western-dominated world. The main point, I think we see it in 100 different ways, is that is over. And it ended actually probably a quarter century ago, but it wasn't noticed as such. After the demise of the Soviet Union, while a new multipolar world was actually emerging, especially with the rise of China, but not only the rise of China, also the economic growth of India and others, the United States was asserting something quite different, which is not only is it the Western-led world, the U.S. now is the only superpower in the world. It became the unipolar world. And this was a great delusion and a great arrogance, and very badly mistimed, because people in Washington are not very clever to begin with. I can absolutely assure you, it's not a snide remark. They just absolutely don't know what they're doing. But in any event, they asserted their unipolarity at precisely the time that the Western-led world was coming to an end. And so we've been at a clash of reality and arrogance for a quarter century, where the United States and even vestigially Europe, and within Europe, I have to say Britain, which is the craziest of all in terms of the gap between reality and image or delusion, thought
China, and to a lesser extent Russia, are rapidly expanding their global footprint in areas once dominated by the United States. From manufacturing power and infrastructure innovation to diplomatic influence, military modernization, and control over supply chains, they are reshaping the global order. Whether this means they are now leading the U.S. depends on how one defines leadership through the lens of economy, military, technology, or global influence, and the period under consideration.
The West runs the world. We can tell Putin what to do. We can tell Xi Jinping what to do. We can tell Modi what to do. We can tell Lula what to do. We can tell anyone what to do because we are the West. We are the United States. And the reality of a world in fundamental change. 2 points about the fundamental change that I think are worth noting. First, and I find it stunning and counterintuitive because of the bubble that we live in the West. But if you add the population of the United States, which is about 340 million people right now, the population of the European Union, the population of the UK, so that North Atlantic world, you come to something around 900 million people, slightly more than 10% of the world population. If you want, and I think it's wrong, but if you want to say that the US-led world includes Japan and Korea, because I don't think that will be true for long, if you want to add Australia and New Zealand, and you can add Singapore if you want, and a very few other places, you get to around 12% of the world population. Well, this should tell us something to begin with. How could 12% of the world population in today's world, in which technology is everywhere, in which the internet is everywhere, in which capacities, nuclear weapons have spread to 9 countries in the world, and on, how could it ever be that 12% of the world thinks that it runs the world anymore, that the others don't have a view, don't have power, don't have capacity to resist unilateral demands? This is the backdrop for me of everything that we're seeing, that we are in a delusion in our English language, Western media, ignorant, politically ignorant world in which Washington, Brussels, London, Berlin, Paris think that this is the center of the world. And honestly, 100 years ago, it was, for good and for bad. But it ain't now, not even close. And so we have 2 major groupings. You discussed them at length yesterday beautifully. The BRICS, which is nearly half the world population and half the world GDP. And that is a grouping that includes the original 5, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, but now includes Egypt and Ethiopia, Iran, the Emirates, Indonesia. And that's a worldwide group stretching from Brazil to China. So it includes South America, it includes Africa, it includes the Middle East, it includes Russia and Asia. And we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which began very much as an Eurasian group, but an East Eurasian group of China, India, Russia, and the 4 of the 5 countries of Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, and Belarus added, Indonesia, and a number of partners. But that's an Asian grouping. And as you said, these two are very closely related. They each have nearly half the world population, not exactly the same membership, but they have two overriding realities to them. One is they're the fast growing part of the world economy, and that itself is worth saying something about. And second, they don't want to be told what to do by Donald Trump. And the best phrasing of that was by President Lula of Brazil, who said a few months ago, we don't need an emperor. And this is the basic point, which is they're not even anti-American, by the way. That is a basic fundamental misunderstanding. They'd actually like normal relations. The point I've been making to all of them for years is you can't trust the United States on this because the U.S. till today, in its delusion, is aiming for hegemony. Clearly, it's not a propaganda. It's the stated policy of the United States to have what they call primacy, or what the military calls full spectrum dominance. This is the idea. I'm trying to say in Washington for 20 years, you guys are crazy because you're the U.S. alone. Okay, you're 4.2% of the world. We are not in 1945 or 1950 or even 1990.